July 5, 1960, a new jetliner lifts off from Los Angeles, heading for Chicago. It's not the glamorous 707 that had just conquered the Atlantic. It's not the sleek 727 that would soon dominate short-haul routes. It's something else, something in between. The Boeing 720. To most passengers, it looked like just another jet. But behind the scenes, this aircraft was a quiet experiment, an unusual solution to a growing problem in the airline industry. It wasn't designed to break records or steal headlines. It was designed to fill a gap. And that gap turned out to be bigger than anyone expected. The 720 didn't sell in huge numbers. It didn't last long in frontline service. But it did something far more important. It proved that airlines needed a jet built specifically for short and medium routes. And that realization would change everything. Because once Boeing saw what the 720 could do, they started building something else, something that would go on to become one of the most successful aircraft in history. But to understand how we got there, we have to start with the jet that almost no one remembers. By the late 1950s, the Boeing 707 had become the face of modern air travel. It was fast, powerful, and capable of connecting continents in a single flight. Airlines were eager to show off their new jets, and passengers were lining up for a taste of the future. But it wasn't the right tool for every job. The 707 worked best on long-haul routes with high passenger demand, transatlantic crossings, coast-to-coast flights, and major international services. On those routes, it was efficient and profitable. But when airlines tried to use it on shorter runs, like Chicago to Denver or Paris to Rome, the numbers didn't add up. Fuel costs were too high, load factors were inconsistent, and the aircraft's size made it difficult to operate from smaller airports. Airlines began to push back. They wanted jets, but not ones designed for intercontinental travel. What they needed was a smaller aircraft that could handle shorter distances, turn around quickly, and still offer the speed and comfort of jet propulsion. Boeing understood the problem, but instead of designing something entirely new, they looked inward. The 707 had a strong foundation. Why not build on it? That question led to a new project, one that would take the 707's proven design and reshape it for a different kind of mission. And that's where the story of the 720 really begins. By 1956, Boeing had already begun quietly working on a solution to the 707 size problem. They called it the 707-02, a placeholder name for what would become a surprisingly complex design challenge. The idea was to create a jet that could serve shorter routes without the excess weight and capacity of the 707, but still retain enough of its DNA to keep development costs low. Boeing explored 10 different configurations. Most of them kept the four-engine layout, but a few were twin jets. One twin-engine version was even shorter than the future 737, but with nearly double the wing area and a tail that looked oversized for its frame. It was clear that Boeing wasn't just trimming the fat. They were rethinking what a short-haul jet could be. Eventually, they settled on a four-engine design. It would carry up to 130 passengers over a range of 1,700 miles. The fuselage was shortened by 9 feet, reducing capacity by 18 seats. The wingspan remained the same as the 707's, but with a new glide-fiber glove added to the leading edge between the fuselage and the inner engine pylon. This small addition improved lift and slightly increased cruising speed. To make the aircraft more efficient on short runways, Boeing extended the leading-edge flaps across the full span of the wing. This allowed the jet to take off and land at lower speeds while flying with a more nose-up attitude on approach. The fuselage skin was made thinner, and the landing gear was fitted with smaller wheels to reduce weight even further. The engine options were still being debated. Boeing considered everything from the original Pratt & Whitney JT3C turbojets to military-grade GE-79s and even Rolls-Royce Avon engines. But despite all the engineering work, there was still one major problem. No one had placed an order. Boeing had built a jet that solved a real problem, but without a name, a buyer, or a clear identity, it was stuck in limbo. That would soon change, thanks to a conversation with one of Boeing's most important customers. By late 1957, Boeing had a design, they had engineering solutions, they even had interest from major airlines, but what they didn't have was a name that worked. The aircraft was still being referred to as the 707-02, a name that made it sound like a lesser version of the 707, rather than a purpose-built jet for a different market. That was a problem, especially for United Airlines, who had already placed orders for the Douglas DC-8. Publicly embracing a Boeing 707 variant with a name like 707-02 risked making it look like they were hedging their bets. United's president, William A. Patterson, made a direct request to Boeing: change the name. The optics mattered. Boeing initially tried to rename the aircraft the 717, but that designation was already in official use for the K-135 Stratotanker, a military derivative of the 707. That left Boeing in a bind. Their naming convention, 707, 727, 737, was just beginning to take shape. Breaking it now would be messy, but they had little choice. So they settled on something unconventional: the Boeing 720. It didn't follow the pattern, it didn't even make sense numerically, but it was just different enough from the 707 to stand on its own, and just familiar enough to reassure airlines that it shared the same trusted DNA. With the name finalized, Boeing moved quickly. The first aircraft, tail number N7201U, rolled out of the Renton factory on October 30, 1959. Less than a month later, on November 23rd, it took to the skies for its maiden flight. At the controls was Tex Johnson, Boeing's most famous test pilot, the same man who had once barrel-rolled the 707 prototype in front of stunned military brass. His co-pilot was Lew Wallach, another veteran of Boeing's test program. The second prototype, N7202U, flew on January 8, 1960. The third, N7203U, followed in March. Together, the three aircraft formed the backbone of a 5-month test program that would push the 720 to its limits. The tests were rigorous: maximum gross weight takeoffs and landings, stall tests at every weight and configuration, high-speed runs that pushed the aircraft to Mach 0.95, and perhaps most importantly, short-field performance trials, crucial for an aircraft designed to operate from smaller airports. At Boeing Field in Washington, N7201U was loaded to 135,000 pounds and flown with a 6-mile-per-hour tailwind. It cleared a simulated 50-foot obstacle and came to a full stop in just 2,200 feet. That was exactly what airlines had asked for: a jet that could land where the 707 couldn't. By April 28, 1960, the first 720 was handed over to United Airlines for crew training. The FAA certification followed on June 30, 1960. In total, the three prototypes had flown 442 hours, including 148 hours with FAA inspectors on board. The 720 was ready for service, but the real question was whether it could prove itself in the cutthroat world of commercial aviation. That answer would come just 5 days later. On July 5, 1960, United Airlines launched the Boeing 720 into commercial service. The inaugural flight, operated by N7201U, departed Los Angeles for Chicago with a stop in Denver. It wasn't a glamorous transatlantic crossing or a record-breaking long haul. It was a practical, domestic route, exactly the kind of mission the 720 had been built for. Just 3 days later, United expanded service to Seattle via Portland and to Las Vegas and San Diego. The 720 was already proving its worth. It could land on shorter runways, turn around faster, and operate more economically than its larger sibling, the 707. American Airlines followed close behind. On July 31st, They launched their Jet Gateway service from Cleveland to Los Angeles via St. Louis. By mid-August, 720s were flying the high-demand New York to Chicago corridor 5 times daily in both directions. American was so pleased with the performance of its 707s and 720s that it branded the fleet Astrojets, a nod to the futuristic appeal of jet travel. But the 720's reach extended far beyond the U.S. Aer Lingus used it for short transatlantic hops from Shannon to Boston and New York, routes where the 707 was overkill. Lufthansa deployed it on exotic long-haul runs from Frankfurt to Santiago de Chile, with stops in Paris, Dakar, Rio, São Paulo, and Buenos Aires. Northwest Orient flew it across Asia from their Tokyo hub to destinations like Guam, Saigon, Taipei, Seoul, and Hong Kong. The 720 also proved ideal for high-altitude airports. Ethiopian Airlines operated it out of Addis Ababa. Avianca flew it from Bogotá and Quito. Air Rhodesia used it on the Nairobi route. El Al, facing geopolitical restrictions, used the 720 on a 16-hour Tel Aviv to Johannesburg route that required 25 course changes and 2 full flight crews. Continental Airlines, stretched thin by its 707 fleet, brought in the 720 in April 1962 to relieve pressure. But after the tragic bombing of Continental Flight 11, a 707 destroyed mid-air in an insurance scam, the airline rushed its 720s into service to maintain capacity on key routes. By the end of 1960, the 720 had proven itself. It wasn't just a stopgap, it was a workhorse. The Boeing 720 was never meant to be a headline act. It was built quickly, sold modestly, and retired quietly. Compared to the 707, 727, and 737, its numbers were small. Just 154 units were produced. But those numbers don't tell the full story. The 720 proved that there was a real market for short and medium-haul jets. It gave Boeing the confidence and the data to invest in aircraft that would go on to define commercial aviation for decades. The 720 didn't just fill a gap, it opened a door. That's all it takes to change everything.